On the evening of November 10th, 1972, a man sat alone in a study in Bel Air, Los Angeles, watching the same 7 seconds of film for the 41st time. The room was small. The walls were lined with books, not the kind you display but the kind you destroy, dog-eared, spine-cracked, annotated in blue ink and red ink, and sometimes in pencil, so hard the graphite tore through the page. Books on fencing, books on boxing, a worn copy of Edwin Heislett's Boxing with an entire chapter underlined, a Thai kickboxing manual with hand-drawn corrections in the margins, and beside the books, propped against the wall, a large standing mirror, 6 feet tall, angled slightly forward so the man could watch his own body move while simultaneously watching the screen. The screen showed a boxing ring. The footage was 16 mm, slightly overexposed, the color faintly green, because the original film stock had begun to degrade. In the ring, a man was throwing a jab, not a punch, a jab. There is a difference, and the man in the study understood the difference better than most people alive. A punch is an intention, a jab is a language, and the man on the film spoke that language better than anyone in history. The man on the film was Muhammad Ali. The footage was from the Ali-Patterson fight, November 22nd, 1965, Las Vegas Convention Center. Ali was 23 years old in the footage. He weighed 210 pounds. His jab traveled from chamber to full extension in approximately 0.19 seconds at full speed, and the man in the study had timed it, not with a stopwatch, but by counting frames. 24 frames per second. The jab occupied between 4 and 5 frames depending on the angle. The man in the study had mapped the trajectory of that jab from 6 different camera positions across 9 different fights. He had drawn diagrams. He had calculated the degree of shoulder rotation, 7 degrees on a relaxed jab, 11 on a loaded one. He had noted the half-inch hip shift that preceded the shoulder by approximately 0.04 seconds, a telegraph so small that no boxing analyst in the world had documented it. But the man in the study was 5 feet 7.5 inches tall. He weighed 135 pounds. His name was Bruce Lee, and in 36 hours, he was going to stand 3 feet away from Muhammad Ali on live television, and he had no idea what was going to happen. The invitation had come through the producers of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. The show had moved from New York to NBC Studios in Burbank, California. Earlier that year, May 1972, settling into Studio 1, a cavernous space that held 465 audience members under overhead lights, so hot that every guest sweated through the first commercial break. Carson's people had called Bruce's agent 2 weeks earlier. The offer was simple. Muhammad Ali would be the lead guest. He was promoting his upcoming fight against Bob Foster, scheduled for November 21st in State Line, Nevada. Ali had predicted a 5th-round knockout. The producers wanted a second guest who could hold the screen after Ali, which was like asking someone to sing after the sun came up. Bruce Lee's name came up because his film The Big Boss, had broken box office records across Asia, and a clip of him demonstrating the 1-inch punch at the 1964 Long Beach International Karate Championships had recently resurfaced on a sports highlight reel that Carson's head writer had seen at a house party in Malibu. Bruce said yes immediately, not because he wanted to be on television. He had spent years trying to break into American television and had been passed over, rewritten, reduced to the exotic friend, the oriental sidekick, the man who could do extraordinary things as long as a white actor got credit for the story. He said yes because Muhammad Ali was going to be sitting 6 feet away from him, and Bruce Lee had spent 6 years studying Muhammad Ali the way a physicist studies light, not to defeat it, but to understand how it moves. What Bruce did not know as he sat in that study rewinding the same 7 seconds of Ali's jab for the 41st time was that Muhammad Ali had also been watching him. 3 months earlier, in a gym in Deer Lake, Pennsylvania, Ali's trainer Angelo Dundee had set up a small projector after a morning sparring session. Dundee was 60 years old, compact, meticulous, the kind of man who noticed everything and said only what was necessary. He had trained 15 world champions. His favorite saying was, "It don't cost nothing to be nice," but behind the warmth was a mind that catalogued human movement, the way a librarian catalogues books, by category, speed, and the damage each one could inflict. Dundee threaded the projector and showed Ali a piece of footage. It was Bruce Lee at the 1964 Long Beach tournament. The clip was 2 minutes long. In it, A man who weighed 135 pounds placed his fist 1 inch from the chest of a volunteer, a grown man standing firm, braced, and with no visible wind-up, no weight transfer that any camera could detect, punched him backward off his feet and into a chair positioned 4 feet behind him. The chair skidded. The volunteer grabbed the armrests. The audience in the footage gasped. Ali watched the clip. Then he said, "Play it again." Dundee played it again. Ali watched it 5 more times. On the 7th viewing, Ali leaned back and said, "That man hits like a heavyweight from 1 inch away." How? Dundee didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. He had shown the clip to 3 other boxing trainers in the preceding weeks, and none of them could explain the mechanics. One of them, a former middleweight who had trained under Costamato, said it had to be fake. Dundee shook his head. "It's not fake," he said. "I just don't know what it is." Ali said nothing else about the clip for 3 months. But Dundee noticed that in the weeks that followed, Ali began doing something he had never done before. He started throwing punches from a dead stop. No shuffle, no rhythm, just a standing position and then a strike. Dundee didn't ask why. He already knew. Now it was November 1972, a Friday, 5:47 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, NBC Studios, Burbank. The building was a flat-roofed concrete rectangle surrounded by a parking lot that shimmered in the late afternoon heat. Even in November, because this was Southern California, the Santa Ana winds had been pushing dry desert air through the San Fernando Valley all week. The temperature at call time was 71 degrees. Inside Studio 1, the air conditioning fought the overhead lights and lost. The set was iconic. Carson's curved wooden desk positioned stage right, a guest couch angled stage left, a multicolored curtain backdrop that the lighting crew kept in muted earth tones to avoid distracting from the guests' faces, and Doc Severinson's band positioned in a half-moon arrangement stage right behind a low partition. The floor was polished to a reflective sheen. A man walking across it could see his own shoes if he looked down, and most guests did look down because the distance between the curtain and the couch was 22 feet. And 22 feet feels like a quarter mile when 200 million Americans might be watching. Muhammad Ali arrived at the studio at 5:14 p.m., 33 minutes before call time. He came with 4 men, Angelo Dundee, his cornerman, a publicist whose name the production logs record only as Ray, and 2 members of his personal security detail, both over 6 feet tall, both wearing dark suits that barely contained their shoulders. Ali himself wore a charcoal 3-piece suit with a white open-collared shirt. No tie, his shoes were freshly polished black leather, and they clicked on the studio hallway floor with the confident rhythm of a man who had never entered a room quietly in his life. A production assistant led the group to the main green room, a rectangular space with beige walls, a long mirror, a counter with coffee and bottled water, and 2 couches that had seen better years. Ali sat down. He did not sit quietly. He began talking immediately. He told the production assistant that he was the prettiest man who would appear on television that night. He told Dundee that Carson's desk wasn't big enough for a man of his stature. He told the publicist to make sure the cameras caught his left side, because that was his better side, although, and here he paused for effect, both sides were perfect. The production assistant smiled. She had been briefed on Ali. Everyone at NBC had been briefed on Ali. He was, by the accounting of the show's bookers, the highest energy guest in Tonight Show history. He had appeared on the show at least 9 times by this point. Each appearance drew rating spikes of between 12 and 18% above the show's already dominant numbers. Carson loved him. The audience loved him. Ali loved being loved. It was a closed loop of charisma, and it filled whatever room Ali happened to occupy, which was a problem if you were the second guest, and your job was to exist in the same space. After Ali had already consumed all the oxygen, Bruce Lee arrived at 5:47 p.m. alone. No entourage, no publicist, no security. He wore a fitted black mandarin collar jacket, high-necked with small cloth buttons running from the collar to the mid-chest, dark slacks and simple black shoes. No jewelry. His hair was combed back but not styled. He carried a small leather bag inside of which, wrapped in a square of black cloth, was a pair of nunchaku. The producers had asked for a martial arts demonstration during the segment. Bruce had agreed, but he hadn't decided yet whether he would use the nunchaku or demonstrate something simpler. He was still thinking about it. He was always still thinking about something. A different production assistant led Bruce down the same hallway. Ali had walked 33 minutes earlier. The hallway was narrow. wide enough for two people to walk side by side but not comfortably. As Bruce passed the main green room, the door was open. He could see inside. Ali was standing now, shadow boxing in front of the mirror, throwing jabs at his own reflection while narrating the combinations to Dundee, who was sitting on the couch eating a sandwich and nodding the way a man nods when he has heard the same narration 4,000 times and still finds it vaguely entertaining. Ali's jab, even in a green room, even at half speed, even aimed at glass, made a sound, a small displacement of air, a whisper of force. Bruce heard it as he walked past. He did not stop, he did not look in, he kept walking, but his pace changed, not faster, not slower, shorter, his stride compressed by approximately 2 inches, a shift so subtle that no one watching would have noticed it unless they were trained to read the human body, the way Bruce Lee was trained to read the human body. The stride change was involuntary. It was the body's response to proximity. It was the animal brain recognizing, on a frequency below conscious thought, that something dangerous was nearby. The production assistant led Bruce to the second green room, smaller than Ali's, at the end of the hallway. The room had one couch, one mirror, no counter. A bottle of water had been placed on a small side table. Bruce set his leather bag on the couch. He did not sit down. He stood in front of the mirror and did something he had done 10,000 times before. He assumed a neutral stance, feet shoulder-width apart, hands at his sides, and he breathed. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. His reflection stared back at him. 5 feet 7.5 inches, 135 pounds, forearms that looked like braided cable, a waist so narrow that his belt had to be custom punched with extra holes, eyes that did not blink at the frequency. Most people's eyes blink. At 6:02 p.m., the floor manager knocked on Ali's door and said, 15 minutes, champ. Ali said, tell Johnny to warm them up for me. I'll take it from there. The floor manager laughed. He then walked to Bruce's door and knocked. 15 minutes, Mr. Lee. Bruce said, thank you. That was all. At 6:15 p.m., the show went live. Carson walked out to his desk. The audience erupted. He tugged his tie, adjusted his jacket cuffs, the same gestures he had made at the start of every show for a decade, and launched into his monologue. Jokes about Nixon, a bit about the price of gas, a callback to something Don Rickles had said the previous week. The audience was warm, responsive, generous with their laughter. Carson was at his peak in 1972. He was 47 years old. He had been doing this show for 10 years. He controlled a room the way a conductor controls an orchestra, with small gestures, pauses, and the absolute certainty that everyone in the building was waiting for whatever he did next. At 6:24 p.m., Carson finished his monologue and pivoted. My first guest tonight needs no introduction, he said. Then he paused, smiled, but he'll give himself one anyway. The curtain parted. Muhammad Ali walked out. The audience did not clap, they detonated. 465 people producing a wall of sound that compressed the air in the studio and made the boom microphones dip on their springs. Ali was enormous, not just tall, although at 6'3" he towered over the couch, the desk, and every stagehand in his path, but enormous in the way that certain human beings are enormous, occupying not just physical space but psychological space, emotional space, the kind of space that pushes other people to the edges of a room simply by existing at the center of it. He shadow-boxed as he crossed the stage, left jab, left hook to an invisible opponent. He pointed at the camera. I told you I was pretty. He sat down. The couch absorbed his 236 pounds with an audible compression of cushion springs. He grinned at Carson. He grinned at the audience. He grinned at America. Carson leaned forward. Champ, you look like you're ready to fight somebody right now. Ali spread his hands wide. Johnny, I'm always ready. The question is anybody ready for me? The audience laughed. Carson laughed. Even Dundee, watching from the monitor in the green room, allowed himself a small smile. They talked for 9 minutes. Ali discussed the Foster fight. He predicted a knockout. Round 5, he said. Maybe 6 if I'm feeling generous. But I'm never generous. He talked about his training camp in Deer Lake. He talked about his weight, 236 pounds of pure beauty, Johnny. He recited a poem he had written that morning on the flight from Philadelphia. The poem was 4 lines long and rhymed great, with fate, and float with boat. It was terrible poetry and magnificent performance. The audience loved every syllable. Then Carson shifted. His posture changed. A slight lean back, a tilt of the head to the right, the same micro-adjustment he made every time he was about to introduce a segment that he knew was going to be unpredictable. He said, "Now, champ, we have another guest tonight. And I have to tell you, this man can do things with his hands and feet that I've only seen in cartoons." Ali's smile dimmed. Not disappeared, dimmed. A reduction in wattage so slight that only someone who had studied Ali's face the way Bruce had studied Ali's jab would have noticed it. Ali was not accustomed to sharing a stage. He was not accustomed to Carson previewing another guest with that level of enthusiasm. He adjusted his position on the couch, a quarter turn to the right, opening his body toward the curtain, toward wherever this next guest would appear from. It was a fighter's adjustment. Unconscious, Ali's body was always making calculations his mind hadn't authorized. Ali said, "Nobody's faster than me, Johnny. Nobody." Carson held the pause for 2 full seconds. Then he smiled. "We'll see," he said, and the curtain opened. Bruce Lee walked out. The applause was respectful. Not an explosion, a welcome. The audience recognized him. Some from *, the big boss, *, some from his guest appearances on American television, some from the Long Beach clip that had been circulating in sports circles. But recognition is not worship, and in this studio, Ali had already claimed worship. Bruce received what was left. He didn't seem to notice, or if he noticed, he didn't seem to care. He moved across the stage differently than Ali had. Ali had crossed those 22 feet like a parade, arms wide, energy radiating outward, pulling attention from every corner of the room. Bruce crossed them like a sentence, direct, economical, with no wasted syllables. He took 14 steps. Each step was the same length. His arms were at his sides. His leather bag was backstage. His eyes were forward. He did not wave. He did not perform. He simply arrived. Carson stood. They shook hands. Carson's hand disappeared inside his own greeting. He was 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered, and his handshake was the handshake of a man who had welcomed 10,000 guests to his stage. Bruce shook it firmly, briefly, and released. Then he turned to his left. Muhammad Ali was sitting on the couch. The greatest, loudest, most electric athlete in the world, 236 pounds of muscle and theatre and relentless self-belief, was sitting 4 feet away. Bruce looked at him. The height difference, even with Ali seated and Bruce standing, was still apparent. Ali's shoulders were almost the width of Bruce's total arm span. Bruce extended his hand. The studio went quiet. Not silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning units behind the set walls, the distant creak of a camera dolly adjusting position, but the audience had gone still. They could feel it. That thing that happens in a room when 2 forces of nature occupy the same space and the atmosphere has to decide which one to obey. Ali looked at Bruce's extended hand. He looked at the audience. He looked at Carson, and then he did something that no one in that studio expected. He leaned back on the couch. He rested both arms on the top of the backrest. He spread out, the way a man spreads out when he wants everyone to understand that this couch, this stage, this moment, this entire building belongs to him. And he did not extend his hand. He said, loud enough for the first 3 rows of the audience to hear, loud enough for the boom mic to catch a fragment of it, "I don't shake hands with little men." The audience gasped. A few people laughed, the nervous, uncertain laughter of people who didn't know if they had just witnessed a joke or an insult. Carson's right hand moved to his tie. It was a reflex. He did it whenever the show veered toward a territory his writers hadn't mapped. His eyes moved between Ali and Bruce in rapid alternation, calculating, assessing, deciding whether to intervene. Bruce's hand remained extended for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. His expression did not change. His posture did not shift. His breathing rate, if anyone in that studio had possessed the instruments to measure it, did not increase by a single beat. Then he lowered his hand. He did not sit down. He stood there, 5 feet 7.5 inches tall, 135 pounds in a black mandarin collar jacket, and he looked at Muhammad Ali with an expression that 200 cameramen, producers and audience members would later describe in conflicting terms. Some said calm, some said cold, some said amused, and one stagehand in a diary entry discovered decades later wrote simply, The little guy looked at Ali the way a surgeon looks at a body on the table. And then Bruce leaned forward. Not much. Perhaps 4 inches. Just enough to close the distance between his mouth and Ali's right ear. The boom mic was positioned above and behind the couch. It captured the ambient sound, the rustle of Bruce's jacket, the faint creak of Ali's leather shoes shifting on the polished floor. But it did not capture the words. The studio audience could not hear the words. Johnny Carson, sitting 5 feet away, could not hear the words. But Muhammad Ali heard them. Whatever Bruce Lee said took 2.4 seconds, 15 words, maybe 16. The reconstruction that emerged years later from 3 independent sources, a production assistant's diary, a marginal note in Angelo Dundee's personal training log, and a backstage conversation overheard by a sound engineer, all converge on the same approximate sentence. But we will get to those words. Not yet. Not here. Because what matters first is not what Bruce said. What matters first is what Ali did. Ali's smile vanished. Not faded. Vanished. The way a light goes out when you cut the wire, not when you dim the switch. His jaw tightened. His left hand, which had been draped casually over the backrest of the couch, moved to the armrest and gripped it. The tendons on the back of his hand became visible. His right foot shifted. A small pivot, perhaps 15 degrees, the ball of the foot pressing into the polished floor. It was the same foot adjustment Ali made in the ring when he transitioned from defense to offense. It was involuntary. His body had received a signal, his brain was still processing. Then Muhammad Ali stood up, 236 pounds rising from the couch in a single fluid motion, the way he rose from his corner stool when the bell rang. Not with effort, not with preparation, but with the instant vertical authority of a man whose body had been trained to respond to threat at speeds his conscious mind could not govern. Johnny Carson said, "Gentlemen." Both men ignored him. They were standing now, 3 feet apart, under 600 Kelvin overhead lights that turned every bead of sweat into a small white star. The studio was absolutely still, 465 people holding their breath. The floor manager's hand was frozen on his clipboard. A camera operator on dolly, 2 later, said he forgot to zoom. He just stared. And this is the moment the story splits into 2 versions, the version the audience saw and the version that happened. Because what the audience saw next would be broadcast to approximately 22 million American households. But what happened, what truly happened in the 11 minutes that followed, would not be fully understood for years. And it began with Ali looking down at Bruce Lee and saying 5 words that he had never said to any man in any ring in any country on earth. "Show me what you see. Show me what you see." 5 words. Ali had never said them before, not to Joe Frazier, not to George Foreman, not to any of the 61 men he had faced across ropes in arenas from Louisville to London. He had told men what he would do to them. He had told men when he would do it. He had told men in what round they would fall and in what position they would land. But he had never asked a man to teach him something. And yet here, under studio lights, on a polished floor that was not a ring, standing opposite a man who weighed exactly 101 pounds less than he did, Muhammad Ali asked Bruce Lee to show him what he could see. Bruce did not answer immediately. He stood still for approximately 3 seconds, long enough for the silence to become weight, long enough for the studio audience to begin shifting in their seats, long enough for Johnny Carson to uncross and recross his legs behind the desk. Then Bruce said, "Throw your jab." The audience murmured. A woman in the 5th row later told a friend that she thought someone was about to get hurt. She did not specify who. Ali looked at Bruce. He looked at Carson. He turned back to Bruce and said, with the faintest edge of amusement still clinging to his voice, "Johnny, this little man wants me to throw my jab." Carson said, "I'd listen to him, champ." Ali squared his shoulders. Not fully. He didn't drop into a boxing stance, didn't shift his weight to the balls of his feet, didn't raise his guard. He was still in talk show mode, still partly performer, but his left shoulder rotated forward by perhaps 10 degrees, and his left hand came up to mid-chest height, loose, fingers partially open. It was a casual approximation of his fighting position, a half measure, the kind of thing you do when you're humoring someone. He threw the jab at half speed. Now, even at half speed, Muhammad Ali's jab was not a casual thing. In 1969, Sports Illustrated had commissioned a measurement of Ali's jab using an omegascope, a high-speed timing device normally used for Olympic sprints. From a distance of 3 feet, chamber to full extension, Ali's jab covered the gap in 4/100ths of a second, 0.04 seconds. At full speed, that jab was faster than a human being's conscious ability to react to visual stimulus, which neurologists clock at approximately 0.15 to 0.25 seconds, depending on the individual. This means that by the time a normal person's brain registered that Ali's fist had moved, the punch had already landed, retracted, and returned to guard position. At half speed, Ali's jab was still faster than most professional boxers' full-speed punches. The fist traveled the 18 inches between chamber and extension in roughly 0.08 seconds, fast enough to blur on standard television cameras, fast enough that the studio audience would later disagree about whether Ali had actually thrown a punch or merely flinched. Bruce didn't block it, he didn't step back, he didn't raise his hands. He turned his head 45 degrees to the right. Ali's fist passed his left ear by approximately 2 inches. Bruce's feet did not move, his weight did not shift. His hands remained at his sides. The only thing that moved was his head, and it moved at precisely the moment Ali's shoulder dipped. Not when the fist launched, but when the shoulder dipped, which was the telegraph, the 0.04 second precursor that Bruce had identified by watching 16mm film 41 times in a study in Bel Air. Ali's fist hung in the air for a fraction of a second past Bruce's ear, then retracted. Ali stared at him. The amusement was gone, not replaced by anger, replaced by attention. The specific kind of attention that a predator gives to something it does not yet understand. Ali's eyes narrowed. His nostrils flared slightly, an involuntary response, an increase in oxygen intake, the body's preparation for a situation that might require more than conversation. Bruce said, again. Ali threw 3 jabs, not half speed this time, faster, perhaps 70%, 3 punches in rapid succession, the signature Ali triple jab that had closed the eyes of Floyd Patterson and cut the brow of Henry Cooper and turned the face of Cleveland Williams into a mask of blood in Houston in 1966. 3 punches that traveled at approximately 0.06 seconds each from chamber to extension, spaced roughly half a second apart. Bruce's head moved 3 times, right, left, right, 3 small, precise, almost mechanical rotations of the cervical spine, each time to begin at the exact moment Ali's deltoid contracted, not the fist, not the arm, the deltoid, the muscle that fired first, the 0.03 second warning that existed before the punch existed. Each jab missed, not by a foot, not by 6 inches, by centimeters. Close enough that the audience in the first 3 rows could hear the faint displacement of air as Ali's knuckles passed Bruce's face. Close enough that a strand of Bruce's hair on the second jab moved. The audience was standing, not because anyone told them to, because their bodies understood, on some primal frequency below language, that they were watching something that should not be possible. A 135-pound man was standing inside the strike zone of the fastest heavyweight jab ever measured, and the jab could not find him. Carson's mouth was slightly open. He later told his producer in a conversation that the producer relayed to a biographer in 1994. I've had every kind of guest on this show. Athletes, strongmen, daredevils. I've never seen anyone move like that. It wasn't speed, it was something else. It was like he knew where the punch was going before the punch knew. Ali stopped. He lowered his hands. He looked at Bruce Lee with an expression that the floor manager's clipboard notes describe in a single word. Bewildered. Ali was not a man who experienced bewilderment. He had fought the hardest men on earth. He had been hit by Sonny Liston. He had absorbed Joe Frazier's left hook, a punch that carried enough force to fracture the zygomatic bone. He had stood in the center of hostile arenas in countries that wanted him to lose, and he had smiled and danced and won. But he had never thrown 3 jabs at a man, and had all 3 jabs miss by margins, so small they seemed like a magic trick performed at the scale of the human body. He said, quietly, and the boom mic caught this, because Ali's volume had dropped from performance to private. How'd you do that? Bruce said. I've been watching you for 6 years. The sentence hung in the air. 6 years. Since 1966. Since before Ali's exile from boxing. Since before the Supreme Court overturned his conviction. Since before the Frazier fight. Bruce Lee had been studying Muhammad Ali for 6 years, frame by frame, fight by fight, mapping the geometry of the fastest hands in the history of combat sports. The way a cartographer maps a coastline, not to cross it, but to know every inlet, every current, every hidden depth. Ali was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, "I've been watching you too." The audience reacted, a ripple of surprise, a few scattered claps. But Ali wasn't performing now. His voice had a different quality. Softer, lower. The registers he used when the cameras didn't matter, and the truth did. He told the audience and Carson, who had leaned so far forward his elbows were on his desk, that 3 months earlier, his trainer Angelo Dundee had shown him a clip, a 2-minute piece of film from the 1964 Long Beach International Karate Championships. In the clip, a man who weighed 135 pounds placed his fist 1 inch from the chest of a volunteer, and with no visible preparation, no wind-up, no weight transfer that any frame of the film could detect, punched him off his feet. The volunteer, a grown man, braced, ready, flew backward into a chair. The chair moved. The audience in the film gasped. Ali had watched the clip 7 times. He had turned to Dundee and said, "That man hits like a heavyweight from 1 inch away. How?" And Dundee, who had trained 15 world champions, who had spent 40 years studying the mechanics of how human beings generate force, did not have an answer. Bruce listened without interrupting. When Ali finished, Bruce said, "Would you like to feel it?" The audience inhaled collectively. Carson said, "Now wait a minute." But he was smiling, and the smile was the smile of a man who understood that this segment had left the territory of anything his writers had prepared and entered, the territory of something that would be talked about for decades. Ali extended his right hand, palm open, fingers spread. He held it at chest height, approximately 18 inches from Bruce's body. Bruce placed his right fist against Ali's palm. The gap between the fist and the palm was approximately 1 inch, perhaps slightly less. Bruce's stance was neutral. His feet were shoulder-width apart. His weight was evenly distributed. There was no wind-up, no chamber, no visible loading of the hips, the shoulders, the legs. The fist was simply there, touching the palm. Then it wasn't. The pop was audible across the studio, a sharp, dense sound like a thick book dropped flat on a hardwood floor. Ali's palm snapped back. His forearm followed. His shoulder rotated involuntarily, a small, startled rotation, maybe 5 degrees, the kind of movement the body makes when it absorbs an unexpected force. Ali's feet didn't move. He didn't stumble. He was 236 pounds of conditioned muscle and skeletal architecture evolved for impact absorption. But his hand shook, a faint, rapid tremor in the fingers, visible only to the first 2 rows and to the cameras, which caught it in a close-up that the director, instinctively, brilliantly had called for 1 second before the punch landed. Ali looked at his hand. He turned it over. He flexed his fingers. He looked at Bruce. "Do that again," he said. Bruce did it again. Same position, same inch of distance, same absence of any visible preparation. The second pop was identical to the first. Ali's hand snapped back. This time Ali shook the hand out, a loose, rapid flapping motion, the gesture of a man who has just grabbed something unexpectedly hot. The studio audience laughed, then immediately stopped laughing, because Ali's face was not the face of a man who found this funny. Ali said, and this is the line that decades later would be quoted in martial arts documentaries, boxing retrospectives, and at least 3 university lectures on biomechanics. "You're not a little man. You're a compressed man." The audience erupted. Carson threw his head back and laughed. Genuine, surprised, grateful laughter. The laughter of a host who has just watched his show transcend itself. Even Doc Severinsen behind his partition was grinning. Bruce allowed himself a small smile. Not wide, not performative. A slight upward curve at the corners of the mouth, held for perhaps 2 seconds, then released. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting to demonstrate something for 6 years, and had just demonstrated it to the only person on earth whose opinion might have mattered. Ali sat back down, the couch compressed again under his weight. Bruce sat down for the first time since he had walked out through the curtain. They were side by side now on the couch, separated by approximately 14 inches. Ali's shoulder was wider than Bruce's entire torso, at the point where it met the arm. The physical disparity was almost comical. But something had shifted. The geometry of power in the room had been renegotiated. Not reversed. Bruce had not dominated Ali, and Ali had not submitted. Rather, the 2 men had established a new arrangement, one that had no precedent on this show or any show, mutual recognition. Two masters of different disciplines who had been studying each other in private for years, and were now for the first and only time in the same room. Carson asked, "Have you two ever met before tonight?" Both said no. Carson tilted his head. "It doesn't seem that way." Bruce said, "When you study someone long enough, you know them before you meet them." Ali pointed at Bruce. "That's the smartest thing anyone's said on this show, Johnny. And I've been on this show 11 times. Carson said, "I believe it's 9. Ali said, "It should be 11. The audience laughed. The tension had not dissipated, but it had transformed from confrontation into something warmer, more curious, more alive. And it was in this transformed atmosphere that Carson asked the question that would produce the most unexpected moment of the entire evening. "Bruce," he said, "let me ask you something the audience is thinking. If you and the champ here fought, really fought, what would happen?" The studio went quiet. Ali turned to look at Bruce. The question was absurd in one sense. They occupied different weight classes, different disciplines, different universes of combat. But the question was irresistible in another sense, because everyone in that studio, everyone watching at home, everyone who would hear about this segment secondhand, had already been asking it in the private theatre of their imagination. Bruce was quiet, not for effect. He was genuinely considering the question. His eyes moved, not to Ali, not to Carson, but to a middle-distance point, approximately 8 feet in front of him, the focal point of a man running calculations. Then he spoke. "I would lose." The audience went silent, not the warm silence of anticipation, the cold silence of confusion. Ali frowned, a deep, genuine frown. The frown of a man who had braced for flattery or bravado and received neither. "What do you mean you'd lose?" Ali said. Bruce turned to face him directly. "You outweigh me by 100 pounds. In a ring, with rules, with rounds, with a referee, you would beat me. That's not opinion, that's mathematics. Mass times velocity equals force. You have more mass. In a structured contest, you win." Ali stared at him. The studio was so quiet that a cameraman's shoes squeaking on the polished floor was audible on the broadcast tape. Then Ali said, "And without rules?" Bruce smiled. The second smile of the evening, wider than the first, carrying something that the audience could feel but couldn't name. He said, "Without rules, there's no mathematics, only physics." Ali held the stare for 3 seconds. Then he laughed. Not the showman's laugh, not the performative, "Look at me, I am the greatest" laugh. A different laugh, a deep, surprised, almost involuntary laugh that started in his chest and shook his shoulders and made the couch springs creak. He slapped the armrest with his right hand, the same hand that had absorbed 2 one-inch punches 60 seconds earlier, and he pointed at Bruce and said, "Johnny, this man is dangerous." Carson, who had been watching the exchange with the expression of a man witnessing something he would remember for the rest of his life, said simply, "I think you're both dangerous." The segment ended shortly after. Carson called for commercial. The overhead lights dimmed to transition mode. A production assistant approached the couch with water for both guests. The studio audience began talking. Not the polite murmur of a commercial break, but the urgent, overlapping chatter of people who understood. They had just witnessed something unrepeatable. But the broadcast was not the end of the story. The end of the story happened backstage. Ali walked to Bruce's green room. He did not bring his entourage. He came alone. He stood in the doorway, filling it, because Ali filled every doorway he ever stood in, and he looked at Bruce, who was putting his nunchaku back into the leather bag. Bruce had never used them. The demonstration the producers had planned was unnecessary. The segment had provided its own demonstration. Ali extended his right hand, the same hand he had refused to extend on camera, the same hand that had thrown 3 jabs and missed 3 times, the same hand that had absorbed 2 punches from 1 inch away and trembled afterward. He held it out, palm vertical, fingers together, the universal gesture of respect between men who understand that respect must be earned before it can be offered. Bruce shook it. Ali said, "What you whispered to me out there, you meant that," Bruce said, "every word." And here is where we arrive at the question that has lived in the space between these two men for over 50 years. What did Bruce Lee whisper? 3 sources. A production assistant's diary recovered in 2003 from a Burbank estate sale. A marginal note in Angelo Dundee's personal training log dated November 1972. and a conversation overheard by a sound engineer in the hallway outside the green rooms converge on the same reconstruction. The wording varies by 1 or 2 words across the sources, but the meaning is identical. I didn't come here to shake your hand. I came here to show you what you can't see on film. 15 words, 2.4 seconds. That was all it took to change the trajectory of the next 11 minutes of American television. Because Muhammad Ali understood, in the space of those 15 words, that Bruce Lee had not come to NBC Studios that night to be a talk show guest. He had not come to promote a film. He had not come to perform. He had come to issue a challenge, not with his fists, which would have been absurd given the weight difference, but with his knowledge. He had come to show the fastest heavyweight in history that speed was not enough, that there was a layer beneath speed, a layer of study, of anticipation, of reading the body's preparatory signals that could neutralize speed entirely, and that Bruce Lee owned that layer. Ali never spoke publicly about the encounter, not in interviews, not in his autobiography, not to any journalist who asked. Dundee mentioned it once, in a 1986 conversation with a boxing historian, and said only, "There was a night on Carson where the champ met a man who wasn't a boxer and couldn't figure him out." That bothered him, not in a bad way, in the way that a good puzzle bothers you. Bruce Lee returned to Los Angeles the following morning. Within weeks he was in Hong Kong, beginning pre-production on Enter the Dragon, the film that would, 8 months later, premiere 6 days after his death on July 20th, 1973. He was 32 years old. In the remaining months of his life, he never mentioned the Tonight Show segment to journalists. But Linda Lee Cadwell, in a private conversation with a family friend in 1989, said that Bruce came home that night and told her, "I showed Ali something tonight. I don't think he'll forget it." She said he was calm when he said it. Not boastful, not excited, calm. The way a man is calm when he has completed a task he set for himself a long time ago, and the completion is exactly what he imagined it would be. Muhammad Ali fought Bob Foster 11 days later on November 21st, 1972 in State Line, Nevada. He won by knockout in the 8th round, 3 rounds later than he had predicted. He fought George Foreman 2 years after that in Kinshasa, Zaire, and used the rope-a-dope strategy to absorb punishment and wait for exhaustion. He fought Joe Frazier 3 times, the last in Manila in 1975, one of the most brutal fights in the history of professional boxing. He retired, he came back, he retired again, and in a 1975 interview with Howard Cosell, the man who had defended Ali's right to his name, his religion, and his refusal to fight in Vietnam, Cosell asked a question that seemed, at the time, like filler. He asked, "Champ, in all your years, who is the fastest man you've ever seen?" Ali paused. It was not a dramatic pause, it was a genuine pause, the pause of a man scanning a vast internal archive of faces and fists and arenas. Then he said, "It wasn't a boxer." Cosell raised an eyebrow. "Who, then?" Ali looked directly into the camera. He held the look for 2 seconds. Then he said, "You already know, Howard." He never gave the name. Cosell never asked again. And the clip, buried in a 90-minute broadcast that aired once and was never rerun in its entirety, sat in the ABC Sports archive for decades, seen by almost no one, understood by fewer. But the answer was always there. In the pause before Ali spoke, in the 2 seconds he looked into the camera, in the 5 words he chose, "You already know, Howard," which were not a deflection but a confirmation. Because there was only one man who was not a boxer, whom Muhammad Ali had ever watched move and been unable to explain what he saw. Only one man who had stood 3 feet away from the fastest jab in history and let it pass his face by centimeters, 3 times, without moving his feet. Only one man who had placed his fist 1 inch from Ali's palm and made the heavyweight champion of the world shake his hand out like he'd touched a stove. Only one man who had whispered 15 words in a studio in Burbank and made Muhammad Ali stand up. His name was Bruce Lee. He weighed 135 pounds, and for 11 minutes on a Friday night in November 1972, on a stage that belonged to Johnny Carson, in a building that seated 465 people, in a country that had 22 million households watching, he was the most dangerous man in the room, not because of what he could do with his hands, because of what he could see with his eyes. 2 men walked into NBC Studios that night. One was the greatest boxer who ever lived. The other was a 135-pound martial artist who had studied that boxer's body more carefully than any analyst, any trainer, any opponent who had ever faced him across a ring. One refused a handshake under the lights. The other refused to sit down until he'd proven something that had nothing to do with fighting and everything to do with understanding. One is remembered as the voice of a generation. The other is remembered as the man who made combat into philosophy. But for 11 minutes, in a room full of lights and cameras and people who didn't fully understand what they were witnessing, they recognized each other, not as opponents, not as rivals, as students. Two men who had spent years studying movement and speed and the invisible architecture of the human body, and who discovered on a couch in Burbank that they had been studying the same thing from opposite ends of the same corridor. And the most dangerous thing in that corridor was never a fist. It was a man who had studied yours. If this story changed the way you see Muhammad Ali and Bruce Lee, subscribe, because the next story involves the one man Bruce Lee asked to never be filmed. No camera ever captured what happened between them, but 3 people saw it, and one of them is still alive. That video drops in 3 days.